Good evening, Commission members. I'm Hannah Ward. As Dennis said, I'm a senior planner with the city. I also help to coordinate the city's technical review team. They are responsible for reviewing the development review application process. The technical review team is made up of 16 members of city staff. They represent multiple different departments throughout the city, and they are responsible for reviewing the following categories. These review responsibilities are shared by the 16 members, and it's represented by planning review, which includes reviewing design standards, development standards, including parking, location of landscaping, zoning, which would include uses and the locations of those uses within the city, landscaping, as I discussed, engineering, which would include roadway design, engineering of the site, topography, whether or not it's in the flood zone, traffic, obviously traffic counts, analysis of the impacts of development, utilities, fire, redevelopment review, what if a site is located within a redevelopment area, surveying, and addressing. So this is a kind of a flow chart of the major components of the development review application process and how the technical review team gets involved. It's typically initiated with a pre-application meeting staff conference, or what people commonly call the technical review team meeting. The general purpose of those meetings is to provide applicants with the opportunity to determine the submittal requirements and procedures and standards that would be applicable to a specific type of application that would be submitted. It also provides city staff an opportunity to become familiar with the project, to provide preliminary comments regarding the scope of the project, the features, impacts, and all of those as in relation to code requirements. I've identified up here some of the applications that do require the pre-application staff conference. That includes comprehensive plan amendments, rezonings, which would include rezonings to city zoning designations, plan development rezonings, or even historic overlay zoning designations, special use permits, public or semi-public use permits, and land development code text amendments. We also provide the opportunity for individuals to schedule pre-application meetings as a courtesy for other types of applications, whether or not they require that. That would include site plans, which typically don't require the pre-application meeting, but it is often a benefit to individuals seeking to develop within the city to have that meeting with staff to kind of understand what will be required of them as they move through the process. So we hold these meetings, the pre-application meetings, we hold them every Tuesday. We schedule appointments from 9 to noon. Currently, those meetings are being held virtually. It's worked really well for us as COVID has been an issue. And we are pretty much booked every week with those application or meetings. The second step in the process that oftentimes applications will be required to demonstrate compliance with is neighborhood meetings. As Dennis said, that was implemented when the new code was brought into effect in 2015, and it provides an additional layer of transparency in the review process that allows for neighbors to become aware of what's going on, or anybody who would be interested in finding out more information about applications that are being submitted. So neighborhood meetings are required for comprehensive plan amendments, special use permits, public and semi-public use permits, and also rezonings that would include plan developments, rezonings to city zoning designations, or historic or overlay zoning designations. These neighborhood meetings are required to occur 21 days prior to an item being scheduled for an advisory or decision-making hearing. But they can occur anytime after the pre-application meeting, even if they have not submitted an application to the city for review. Right. A little bit about the requirements and procedures in the Land Development Code that provide standards for what needs to be submitted to the city and the noticing that's provided to people in the community. So 10 days in advance of the meeting, applicants are required to provide a mailed notice to property owners within 300 feet of the land subject to the application. They are also required to provide that notice to city staff. These are all requirements I wanted to point out that are required to be fulfilled by the applicant, and that information is summarized and provided to city staff in advance of their scheduled hearings to make sure that they've met the requirements. They're also required to do a posted notice of the meeting 10 days advance of the meeting. I provide an example of the sign that they're required to post, and they're required to post that notice on any of the right-of-ways abutting the property, and that notice is required to be visible from the right-of-ways abutting that property. Then the applicant is also required to hold the meeting in a location that is convenient and accessible to neighbors residing in close proximity to the site subject to the application, and it's required to be scheduled at 6 p.m. on a weekday to provide neighbors or anybody from the public who's interested in the application the opportunity to come hear the discussion. As I said before, a summary of the neighborhood meeting is required to be provided to city staff, and that information is typically included in the staff reports that are provided to the advisory board as well as the decision-making boards. The next step in the process is the application submittal and acceptance. I just wanted to be clear that sometimes we have applicants go through the pre-application staff conference, maybe sometimes they'll even have their neighborhood meeting, but they won't proceed to doing the actual application submittal and acceptance. These are all kind of steps in the process, and one leads to the next. So with regards to the application submittal, once we receive those applications, they are placed in a review cycle. We have a review cycle that begins every Thursday at noon, so applications submitted by that time get placed into a review cycle, and that kind of initiates the staff review of the project. So within 5 business days of us receiving the application, we're required to review it to make sure all of the documents that are necessary for review have been provided, all the associated fees, and the formatting of the application is correct. Once we've been able to review that for completeness and determine that it can proceed to the staff review, then that kind of initiates the cycle where the technical review team gets involved. If the application is incomplete for missing documents or missing formatting or application fees, the applicant is also provided that information either via email or phone call and notified so that they can provide us the complete information to initiate that process. Once we receive a complete application is when the process for staff review gets initiated. We do try to work with applicants on, because sometimes we'll receive parts of the documents and not. We try to work with them to make sure that they're remaining on the schedule they anticipate for their project. But we do have a large volume of projects that come through, so we just try to make sure that this stuff is happening in a consistent manner and that we're providing fair treatment to everyone who's submitting applications. So with regard to the staff review process, I wanted to kind of highlight the average timelines for review, and this is the information that we provide to individuals in the pre-application meeting. So typically I would say on a general application, right now we're in about a 2 to 3 week review cycle. Oftentimes applications will go through 3 to 4 rounds of review prior to all outstanding comments being resolved, and we say about 4 to 6 months from approval average, but that timeline may be shortened or lengthened based on the quality of the submittals and how quickly the applicant responds to staff comments. The average review timelines kind of bend and flex based on the volume of the projects, but we do try to keep that at between 2 and 3 week review cycles so people can anticipate information being provided to them. When this happens, I basically compile the review from all of the 16 members of the technical review team, and that document with the complete review from all members is provided for comment and review by the applicant, and then they have to submit the information back to us with all of the supporting information and revisions until all outstanding comments are resolved. Once that occurs, then we begin scheduling for the advisory hearings or the decision-making hearings. So I wanted to kind of show you all the general notice schedule that we provide to applicants with their development review application packet. If you look at the far left column that's been highlighted, that identifies to applicants when their outstanding comments have to be resolved in order to proceed to the public hearings. So we don't schedule any applications for public hearings until all outstanding comments are resolved, and that is required to occur at least 30 days prior to the scheduled hearing date that they're that they are intending to appear on. And then obviously the planning board and city commission dates based on the type of application are outlined for them based on the timelines that are required for us to prepare our agenda packages. So I wanted to go back to the previous slide. If a staff report is warranted and the application is going to be heard by an advisory board or a decision-making board, the staff report is required to conclude whether or not the application complies with the Land Development Code review standards for each application type. So we basically do an analysis of the review standards associated with each application, and that's provided to support whether or not our staff recommendation of the project and whether or not it's complying with the standards. The staff report may also identify compliance deficiencies and how these may be corrected or how adverse impacts may be mitigated with regard to a project. Did you have a question? Okay. And so we do have two different routes that the applications go. They either require a staff decision, which would be an administrative approval of a project, or they are heard by the advisory boards or the decision-making board. And so I highlighted kind of the different routes that we kind of see with regard to approvals. It'll be either a flat approval with conditions, and then or a denial of the application because it's not meeting the standards identified. All right. So I just wanted to identify this again. We do have a packet that's provided to applicants when they go to submit their application. This is provided to them in the pre-application meeting staff conference. It's about 18 pages long, but it includes this general notice schedule. It includes contact numbers and emails for all city staff members that are associated with the technical review team, and then it provides detailed information regarding our process and submittal requirements and the expectations as they move through the process with regard to the different components of the review and the requirements that they need to follow. Sure.
Testing. If an applicant is denied, what's the process? Do they have to start over, or they need to go back and do what they should have done?
So there is an appeal process in our land development code. So they do have the opportunity to appeal based on what the application is being denied for. And the land development code identifies different reviewing bodies that would then review the appeal process.
Let me just clarify one thing. There are several types of decisions, such as variances for which there are no appeal. There's a general provision in Section 3.3 of the Land Development Code that does contain a restriction on reapplication within a 6-month period after denial, and that would extend to after appeal is upheld, unless the application changes significantly or the facts change significantly.
And I actually haven't dealt with too many appeals. So when we do have those requests come through, we have to kind of take a look at the standards in the land development code and see which route it's required to follow with regard to that appeal process. You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. So then the last part of the process is obviously when the application moves to the advisory body review and then the decision-making body review and recommendation or final decision-making. So I just kind of wanted to highlight, I put a table up here to highlight some of the more common applications and how those are reviewed. So for example, rezonings, they're required to be heard by an advisory body. So if that's located within a redevelopment area or for, say, a historic overlay zoning designation, the advisory body, kind of the flow of that would be, they would need to be heard by the historic board, then the redevelopment board associated with that redevelopment area, then the planning board, then the city commission. So sometimes applications will have multiple layers of public hearings prior to you all being able to hear the project. So I kind of just wanted to simplify that table for you all to kind of show the more common applications and how those are heard. With regard to site plans, anything under 20,000 square feet would be an administrative approval of a site plan. Anything exceeding 20,000 square feet is heard by the planning board for approval. If it's in a redevelopment area, it's heard by the redevelopment board for approval. Any industrial development adjacent to residential areas exceeding 20,000 square feet would also be required to be heard by the planning board or the redevelopment board for that area. And then if an industrial development exceeds 20,000 square feet, but it is not located adjacent to any residential, that is a staff approval of that type of project. And this concludes my presentation, but if you all have any questions, I'm here to answer anything. You're welcome.